Dr. Sarah Chun stared at the readings on her monitor for the third time, her coffee growing cold as disbelief washed over her. The numbers couldn't be right. After 15 years of working with electromagnetic field manipulation, she knew the theoretical limits by heart. What she was seeing should have been impossible. The laboratory hummed with the quiet efficiency of Earth's most advanced materials research facility. Hidden beneath the Swiss Alps, the Prometheus Institute had been humanity's last hope for developing defensive technologies against the Zephyrian Empire. For 3 years, the alien confederation had pressed closer to human space, their energy weapons cutting through every shield technology humanity could devise. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she ran the test again. The crystalline lattice she had been working on was supposed to be another failed attempt at creating energy-resistant armor. Instead, something unprecedented had happened during the molecular bonding process. The sample sat innocuously in the containment field, looking like nothing more than a dark gray metal cube. But when she had accidentally exposed it to the plasma test beam, something extraordinary occurred. The energy hadn't been absorbed, reflected, or dispersed. It had simply ceased to exist. Her colleague, Dr. Marcus Webb, looked up from his own workstation across the lab. "Sarah, you've been staring at that screen for 20 minutes. What's got you so fascinated?" She beckoned him over, her voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus, I need you to look at something. Tell me if you see what I'm seeing." Webb approached, adjusting his glasses as he studied the data. His expression shifted from casual interest to confusion, then to the same disbelief Sarah felt. "This can't be right. The energy signature just disappears." "That's what I thought too." Sarah pulled up the raw sensor data. "But look at this. The plasma beam maintains full coherence right up until it hits the sample. Then, there's no reflection, no absorption signature, no heat generation. The energy just stops existing." Webb ran his fingers through his graying hair. "Have you checked for equipment malfunction?" "3 times. I've also run diagnostics on every sensor in the lab. Everything's functioning perfectly." Sarah turned to face the sample chamber. "Marcus, I think we've stumbled onto something that violates everything we know about energy conservation." The implications began to sink in for both scientists. Every weapon the Zephyrians used relied on directed energy. Plasma cannons, particle beams, fusion lances. All of it was useless if the energy simply vanished upon contact. Webb moved closer to the containment unit. "What's the composition of the sample?" Sarah pulled up the molecular analysis. "That's the strangest part. It's mostly carbon arranged in a lattice structure I've never seen before. But there are trace amounts of elements that shouldn't exist according to our periodic table. The atomic weights are all wrong. Exotic matter? Maybe. Or maybe we've created something entirely new." Sarah saved her data to the secure server. "The really interesting thing is how it formed. I was trying to create a carbon-metallic hybrid using the new quantum forge. The process was supposed to take 6 hours, but there was a power surge that compressed the entire sequence into 30 seconds. Webb studied the energy readings more carefully. "The power surge, where did it come from?" "That's what's been bothering me." Sarah called up the facility's power monitoring systems. "According to these logs, there was no surge from our grid. But the quantum forge recorded a massive energy input at the exact moment the lattice completed formation." They stood in silence for several minutes, both understanding they were looking at something that would change everything. The sample represented more than just a new material. It was potentially the key to humanity's survival. "We need to run more tests," Webb said finally. "But, Sarah, if this is what I think it is." "I know." She looked at her colleague with a mixture of excitement and fear. "We need to contact Director Harrison immediately, and we need to be very careful about who else knows about this." The facility's communication system chimed softly. Sarah accessed the incoming message, her face growing pale as she read. "What is it?" Webb asked. "Long-range sensors have detected a Zephyrian scouting fleet entering the outer system. They're 6 months out, maybe less." Sarah looked back at the innocuous sample. "Marcus, I think we just found humanity's ace in the hole." Webb was already moving toward the secure communication terminal. "I'll contact Harrison. You start preparing a full analysis protocol. If we're going to convince the Defense Council that we've found something revolutionary, we need irrefutable proof." As her colleague began the encrypted communication sequence, Sarah turned back to her workstation. The sample continued to sit motionless in its containment field, looking utterly ordinary. Yet somehow, this small cube of impossible matter might be the key to humanity's survival against an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy. She began designing a comprehensive testing regime, her mind racing with possibilities. If they could replicate the effect, scale it up, weaponize it somehow, humanity might not just survive the coming war. They might actually win it. The Prometheus Institute had been built to develop defensive technologies. But Sarah was beginning to suspect they had just discovered something far more powerful than any shield. They had found a way to make the universe's most fundamental forces simply disappear. Outside the facility, snow continued to fall on the alpine peaks, peaceful and serene. In 6 months, that peace would be shattered by the arrival of humanity's greatest enemy. But deep beneath the mountains, 2 scientists worked frantically to turn an impossible discovery into humanity's salvation. The sample sat in its field, innocuous and silent, holding secrets that would reshape the balance of power across the galaxy. Neither Sarah nor Marcus fully understood what they had created. They only knew that energy weapons, the foundation of Zephyrian military supremacy, had just become as obsolete as stone clubs. The age of energy warfare was about to end. The question was whether humanity would survive long enough to take advantage of their incredible discovery. Director Harrison arrived at the Prometheus Institute within hours of Webb's urgent communication, bringing with him a small team of theoretical physicists and military advisors. The underground facility buzzed with nervous energy as Sarah prepared to demonstrate her discovery to the assembled group. The testing chamber had been cleared and reconfigured with the most sensitive instruments available. Sarah's sample now sat at the center of a sophisticated array of sensors, cameras, and measurement devices. Every person present understood the stakes. If this demonstration failed, humanity would face the Zephyrian fleet with nothing but conventional weapons. Ladies and gentlemen, Director Harrison addressed the group. Dr. Chun believes she has discovered a material that can neutralize directed energy weapons. The implications, if true, would fundamentally change our defensive capabilities. Admiral Rodriguez, the Defense Council's chief military advisor, looked skeptical. Director, with all due respect, we've seen dozens of promising technologies fail when put to real testing. What makes this different? Sarah stepped forward, her confidence growing despite the pressure. Admiral, what you're about to see violates several fundamental laws of physics. I understand your skepticism, but the evidence speaks for itself. She activated the first test device, a low-powered laser that would normally leave a visible burn mark on any material. The red beam struck the sample and simply vanished. No reflection, no heat signature, no energy dispersion. The laser light disappeared as if it had never existed. Dr. Elizabeth Zhao, the team's lead physicist, leaned forward intently. Fascinating. The photons are neither absorbed nor reflected. They appear to be canceled somehow. That's just the beginning, Sarah said, increasing the laser's power output. Even at settings that would cut through steel plate, the sample remained completely unaffected. The energy simply ceased to exist upon contact. Admiral Rodriguez's skepticism began to waver. Increase the power level. I want to see what happens with military-grade weapons. Sarah nodded and activated the testing chamber's plasma cannon, a scaled-down version of the weapons used by human warships. The brilliant blue-white beam should have vaporized anything in its path. Instead, it met the sample and disappeared entirely, as if someone had simply switched off the weapon. The room fell silent. Dr. Zhao was furiously taking notes, muttering calculations under her breath. Admiral Rodriguez stared at the unchanged sample, his military mind already racing through tactical implications. Run it again, Harrison ordered. Maximum power. The plasma cannon charged to full capacity, drawing enough energy to power a small city. When the beam fired, the intense light filled the chamber. For a moment, the sample was completely invisible within the plasma stream. Then, the weapon automatically shut down, its energy reserves exhausted. The sample sat unchanged, showing no signs of damage, heating, or alteration. It might as well have been struck by a gentle breeze. How? Admiral Rodriguez asked simply. Sarah pulled up her theoretical models on the main display. Near as we can tell, The material creates a localized null field. Any directed energy that enters this field simply ceases to exist. It's not converted to heat, it's not stored, it's not reflected. The energy is removed from the universe entirely. Dr. Zhao looked up from her calculations. That's impossible. Energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed. What you're describing violates conservation of energy. I know, Sarah replied. But the evidence is undeniable. We've run every test we can think of. The effect is real, reproducible, and consistent. Harrison stepped closer to the viewing window. Can you recreate this material? That's where things get complicated. Webb joined the conversation, pulling up manufacturing data. We know the basic composition. It's primarily carbon in an exotic lattice structure with trace amounts of elements that don't match our periodic table. But the creation process itself is problematic. Admiral Rodriguez frowned. What kind of problems? The material only forms under very specific conditions, Sarah explained. We need the quantum forge operating at maximum capacity, and then we need what appears to be an external energy spike of enormous magnitude. We've tried to replicate the process dozens of times, but we can't generate the required energy surge. Dr. Zhao studied the molecular diagrams. Where did the original energy spike come from? Unknown, Webb admitted. Our sensors recorded the input, but we can't identify the source. It wasn't from our power grid, solar activity, or any known phenomenon. Harrison's expression grew troubled. So we have one sample of a material that could revolutionize warfare, but we can't make more of it. Not yet, Sarah said. But we have some theories. The energy signature suggests the spike came from outside our dimensional space. We think the quantum forge accidentally tapped into what physicists call zero-point energy, the underlying energy field that exists throughout space. The implications hit Admiral Rodriguez immediately. If we could harness that process, we could mass-produce the material, Sarah confirmed. But it would require completely redesigning our understanding of quantum mechanics and dimensional physics. Dr. Zhao was already sketching theoretical frameworks on her tablet. The mathematics are staggering. If you've truly tapped into zero-point energy, you haven't just created a new material. You've opened a door to unlimited power generation. Harrison began pacing, his mind working through the strategic implications. How long would it take to develop a production process? Months, maybe years, Webb replied honestly. We're working with entirely new physics here. We don't have years, Admiral Rodriguez stated grimly. The Zephyrian fleet will arrive in 6 months. We need solutions now. Sarah had been thinking about this problem since the discovery. Admiral, we may not be able to mass-produce the material yet, but we have enough of this sample for limited applications. A few grams could protect critical ship systems. A larger piece could shield an entire vessel's bridge or reactor core. And if we could create even small amounts more, every human ship could carry energy nullification armor in key areas. Their plasma weapons would be useless against protected targets. Sarah's excitement was building. But there's something else we haven't considered. The room turned to her expectantly. This effect works on any directed energy. That includes communications, sensors, and targeting systems. The Zephyrians rely entirely on energy-based technology. We could blind them, cut their communications, disable their sensors, all while remaining completely invisible to their weapons. Admiral Rodriguez's eyes widened as the full potential became clear. Dr. Chun, you may have just given us the key to defeating an enemy that's conquered half the galaxy. But Dr. Zhao raised a cautionary hand. There's something we need to consider. If this material can nullify energy completely, what happens if the effect scales up? Could we accidentally create a null field large enough to affect stars? Planets? The room fell silent as they contemplated the terrifying possibility. Sarah's revolutionary discovery could save humanity, or it could destroy everything they were trying to protect. Harrison made the decision for all of them. We proceed carefully, but quickly. Dr. Chun, I'm authorizing unlimited resources for this project. We have 6 months to turn this discovery into a weapon that can stop the Zephyrians. As the meeting dispersed, Sarah looked back at the small sample that held such enormous potential. They had found humanity's ultimate breakthrough, but using it would require them to master forces beyond their current understanding. The race against time had begun. 3 months after the initial discovery, the Prometheus Institute had been transformed into humanity's most critical research facility. Scientists from across Earth worked around the clock, while military engineers studied every possible application of Sarah's impossible material. The progress had been frustrating. Despite unlimited resources and the galaxy's best minds, they had managed to create only 3 additional samples, each smaller than the original. The zero-point energy tap remained elusive, occurring seemingly at random and beyond their control. Sarah stood before a wall of equations that covered nearly every surface in the expanded laboratory. Months of theoretical work had brought them closer to understanding the material's properties, but practical applications remained limited. Still nothing on replication? Dr. Webb asked, joining her in front of the mathematical maze they had created. The energy patterns are too random, Sarah replied, exhaustion clear in her voice. We know zero-point energy exists everywhere, but accessing it requires precise quantum resonance frequencies that we can't predict or control. Across the lab, Dr. Zhao was working with a team of quantum physicists, trying to decode the dimensional mathematics that made the material possible. Their calculations suggested that the energy nullification effect was actually pulling directed energy into parallel dimensions where it harmlessly dissipated. Admiral Rodriguez entered the lab carrying the latest intelligence reports. His expression was grim. The Zephyrian fleet has accelerated their approach. Our long-range sensors show they'll arrive in 3 months, not 6. The room fell silent as the implications hit home. 3 months to turn limited samples into a defensive strategy against the most powerful military force in the galaxy. What's our current inventory? Harrison asked, reviewing the production logs. For samples total, Webb reported. The largest is roughly the size of a golf ball. The others are significantly smaller. Sarah turned from her equations, an idea beginning to form. Admiral, have we considered that we might be approaching this wrong? What do you mean? We've been thinking about this defensively, using the material to protect our ships and installations. But what if we went on the offensive? Admiral Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Offensive applications? Sarah moved to the tactical display, calling up schematics of Zephyrian ship designs captured from previous encounters. Look at their technology. Everything depends on directed energy. Weapons, shields, propulsion, communications, life support systems. It's all energy-based. The military implications began to dawn on the room. Dr. Zhao looked up from her calculations. You're suggesting we weaponize the nullification effect? Exactly. Sarah highlighted critical systems on the enemy ship displays. We don't need to protect every human vessel. We need to deliver our material directly to their ships and disable their entire technological infrastructure. Webb studied the tactical scenarios. How would we deliver it? Our samples are too small for conventional warheads. That's the beauty of it, Sarah explained, pulling up molecular analysis data. The material maintains its effects even when dispersed into microscopic particles. A few grams could be distributed as a fine dust throughout an enemy vessel's atmosphere. Admiral Rodriguez was already working through combat applications. Delivery via missile warhead? Or stealth drones, Sarah suggested. Once the particles are distributed inside a Zephyrian ship, every energy-based system would begin failing. Their weapons would stop firing, their shields would collapse, their life support would shut down. Harrison studied the proposed delivery methods. How long would the effect last? Based on our testing, the nullification field remains active indefinitely, Dr. Zhao reported. The particles don't degrade or lose potency over time. The strategic possibilities were staggering. Admiral Rodriguez began sketching battle plans. We could disable entire fleets without firing a shot, turn their own technology against them. But Webb raised practical concerns. We still only have 4 samples. Even dispersed as particles, that's enough for maybe 2 or 3 enemy vessels. Sarah had been considering this limitation for weeks. Marcus, what if we don't need to produce more material? What if we can amplify the effect? She moved to her latest theoretical models, showing quantum field equations that made even Dr. Zhao pause. The nullification effect operates by creating resonance cascade in the zero-point field. If we could trigger that cascade artificially, you could create null zones without needing the material itself, Dr. Zhao finished, understanding immediately. Exactly. The material would become a catalyst rather than a consumable. One sample could potentially neutralize energy across vast areas of space. Admiral Rodriguez leaned forward intently. How vast? Sarah ran quick calculations on the lab's supercomputer. Theoretical maximum? A sphere several light minutes in diameter. Large enough to encompass an entire enemy fleet. The room erupted in excited discussion as the implications became clear. They wouldn't just be defending Earth. They could create weapons that would make energy-based warfare obsolete throughout the galaxy. But Harrison raised the critical question. Can we build this in 3 months? Sarah looked at her exhausted team, then at the mountain of theoretical work still required. We'll need to completely redesign our approach. Instead of trying to replicate the material, we focus on creating resonance amplifiers. What would that involve? Webb asked. Quantum field generators capable of synchronizing with the material's natural frequency. We'd essentially turn our ships into massive resonance devices, using the samples as focusing elements. Dr. Zhao was already sketching preliminary designs. The power requirements would be enormous, but it's theoretically possible. We'd need to retrofit our largest vessels with experimental quantum cores. Admiral Rodriguez studied the tactical advantages. Imagine the psychological impact. An entire Zephyrian fleet disabled without warning, floating helpless in space. It would shatter their confidence in energy weapons forever. Harrison made the decision that would determine humanity's future. All right, we're changing direction. Dr. Chun, you have 3 months and unlimited resources to turn theory into reality. Dr. Zhao, I want prototype amplifiers built and tested within 6 weeks. Admiral Rodriguez, prepare contingency plans for both success and failure scenarios. As the team dispersed to begin their desperate race against time, Sarah remained before her wall of equations. Somewhere in those mathematical relationships lay the key to humanity's survival. The Zephyrians had conquered dozens of civilizations with their energy supremacy, but they had never encountered an enemy that could make their greatest strength simply disappear. The material that had started as a laboratory accident was about to become the foundation of humanity's first galactic victory. Energy weapons, the foundation of modern warfare for 1,000 years, were about to become as obsolete as bronze swords. 3 months to rewrite the rules of physics and save their species. Sarah turned back to her calculations with renewed determination. The breakthrough was within reach. She could feel it. They just had to be smart enough and fast enough to grasp it before the Zephyrian fleet arrived to end humanity's brief experiment with interstellar civilization. The orbital shipyard above Earth had never seen such frantic activity. In just 2 months, humanity's largest battleship, the UES Defiance, had been completely retrofitted with experimental quantum field generators and resonance amplifiers. The massive vessel now bristled with equipment that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. Sarah stood on the ship's bridge, watching final system checks through the observation ports. In 6 hours, the Zephyrian advance fleet would drop out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. This would be humanity's only chance to test their revolutionary weapons under real combat conditions. Final diagnostics are complete, reported Lieutenant Commander Torres, the ship's chief engineer. All quantum cores are operating within normal parameters. Resonance amplifiers are synchronized and ready for activation. Admiral Rodriguez studied the tactical displays showing enemy approach vectors. 12 Zephyrian warships, including 2 dreadnoughts. Their energy output readings are off the charts, enough firepower to glass a planet. Captain Morrison, the Defiance's commanding officer, reviewed the engagement plan one final time. Dr. Chun, are you confident the amplification effect will work at combat ranges? Sarah wished she felt more certain. Their testing had been limited to laboratory conditions and computer simulations. Captain, the theory is sound. Our samples should be able to project nullification fields across several thousand kilometers. But this will be the first real-world test. Dr. Zhao monitored the quantum field generators from her console. Field coherence is stable. The resonance patterns match our theoretical models perfectly. If the mathematics are correct, we should be able to disable their entire fleet simultaneously. The Defiance was not alone in the coming battle. Humanity's entire remaining fleet had assembled for this confrontation, 47 vessels ranging from destroyers to battleships. But everyone understood that conventional weapons would be useless against Zephyrian energy shields. Everything depended on Sarah's impossible technology. Long-range sensors are detecting hyperspace distortions, announced the tactical officer. Enemy fleet emerging from hyperspace in 90 seconds. Sarah felt her heart rate accelerate as months of theoretical work was about to face its ultimate test. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for a battle that would determine humanity's survival. There, Lieutenant Torres pointed through the observation port as brilliant flashes of light appeared against the star field. 12 contacts, bearing 27 Mark IV. Range, 1 million kilometers, and closing. The Zephyrian ships were magnificent and terrifying. Each vessel was a work of art, their hulls gleaming with exotic alloys that seemed to bend light itself. Energy discharges played across their surfaces as weapon systems charged and shields activated. They moved with predatory grace, confident in their technological superiority. Incoming transmission, reported the communications officer. They're demanding our immediate surrender. Admiral Rodriguez's expression was grim. Standard Zephyrian protocol. They always offer surrender before demonstrating their overwhelming firepower. He turned to Captain Morrison. Signal the fleet. All vessels are to remain at maximum range and observe. The Defiance goes in alone. Sarah watched as the distance closed between the human ship and the enemy fleet. At 800,000 kilometers, the Zephyrians opened fire. The space around the Defiance erupted in brilliant destruction. Plasma beams that could cut through asteroids, particle cannons capable of boring through planetary cores, and fusion lances that burned hotter than stellar cores, all focused on a single human vessel. Shields are holding, Torres reported, though strain was evident in his voice. But we can't take much more of this punishment. Range to optimal amplification distance. Morrison asked. 400,000 kilometers, Sarah replied, watching her instruments carefully. We need to get closer for maximum effect. The Defiance pressed forward through the energy barrage, its conventional shields flickering under the assault. Several systems showed damage, but the ship's core systems remained operational. 300,000 kilometers, Sarah announced. We're within amplification range. Beginning quantum field initialization. The ship trembled as massive energy flowed through the experimental equipment. Throughout the vessel, the quantum cores hummed with power that existed at the boundary between dimensions. Sarah's samples, now integrated into the resonance amplifiers, began generating field patterns that shouldn't have been possible. Field projection starting, Dr. Zhao reported. Resonance cascade building toward critical threshold. On the tactical display, an invisible sphere of nullification began expanding from the Defiance. Sarah watched the field envelope grow larger, reaching out toward the enemy fleet with the power to end energy-based warfare forever. The effect was immediate and devastating. The nearest Zephyrian destroyer simply went dark. Its weapons stopped firing, its shields collapsed, and its hull ceased glowing with energy. The ship continued forward on momentum alone, completely powerless. My God, whispered Captain Morrison. It actually works. The nullification field continued expanding, reaching the second enemy vessel. Like the first, it immediately lost all power systems. Weapons went silent, engines stopped functioning, and life support systems shut down. But the Zephyrians were not helpless. As their energy-based systems failed, emergency protocols activated backup systems that Sarah hadn't anticipated. Mechanical backup life support, chemical thrusters, and kinetic weapons that didn't rely on directed energy. They're adapting faster than we expected, Admiral Rodriguez observed as several enemy ships changed course using backup propulsion. The two Zephyrian dreadnoughts, massive vessels the size of city blocks, began a tactical withdrawal. Their energy weapons were useless within the nullification field, but they still carried conventional missile systems and kinetic bombardment weapons. Incoming projectiles, announced the tactical officer. Kinetic penetrators and fusion warheads. Sarah realized with growing concern that they had solved only half the problem. The nullification field made energy weapons obsolete, but the Zephyrians still had other means of destruction. Dr. Chun, Captain Morrison called out. Can you extend the field range? We're already at maximum projection, Sarah replied, studying her readings. The field is stable out to 500,000 kilometers, but we can't push it any further without risking cascade failure. The battle was becoming a deadly game of positioning. Human ships could operate freely within the nullification zone, protected from energy weapons. But the Zephyrians were learning to fight from outside the field, using kinetic weapons and long-range missiles. Admiral, Dr. Zhao called out urgently. I'm reading massive energy buildup from the lead dreadnought. They're charging something that's drawing power from multiple reactors. Rodriguez studied the sensor readings with growing alarm. Dr. Chun, is it possible they have weapons that can penetrate the nullification field? Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized what the Zephyrians were attempting. They're not trying to penetrate the field. They're preparing to overload it. The lead dreadnought was channeling every available reactor into a single, massive energy discharge. If they could generate enough raw power, they might be able to overwhelm the quantum resonance and collapse the nullification field entirely. How long do we have? Morrison asked. Based on their energy buildup rate, maybe 90 seconds, Sarah calculated frantically. The first real test of humanity's ultimate breakthrough was about to become a race between revolutionary physics and overwhelming brute force. The outcome would determine not just the battle, but the future of warfare across the galaxy. Sarah's fingers flew over her controls, desperately searching for a way to strengthen the field before the Zephyrians could destroy it. Everything humanity had worked for came down to the next 60 seconds. Sarah stared at her readings in disbelief as the Zephyrian dreadnought prepared to unleash enough energy to crack a moon. But something unexpected was happening within the nullification field itself. Dr. Chun, Dr. Zhao called out urgently. The field isn't weakening, it's growing stronger. The resonance cascade is feeding on the Zephyrian energy buildup. Sarah's eyes widened as she understood what was occurring. The quantum field wasn't just nullifying directed energy, it was converting that energy into fuel for its own expansion. The more power the Zephyrians directed toward overloading the field, the larger and more stable it became. All ships, move to maximum engagement range, Admiral Rodriguez commanded. The field is about to expand dramatically. The Zephyrian dreadnought fired its massive energy weapon, a concentrated blast that should have shattered continents. The beam struck the nullification field and simply vanished, but the field itself pulsed outward like a shockwave, growing from 500,000 kilometers to nearly 2 million kilometers in diameter. Suddenly, the entire Zephyrian fleet found itself trapped within the expanding null zone. Incredible, whispered Captain Morrison as enemy ships throughout the battle zone went completely dark. Their own weapons made our field strong enough to disable their entire fleet. The Zephyrian vessels drifted powerlessly through space, their energy-based technology completely neutralized. Emergency chemical thrusters fired sporadically as crews tried to maintain basic maneuvering, but their sophisticated weapons, shields, and sensors were completely offline. Sarah, this is beyond anything we theorized, Dr. Zhao said, studying the field dynamics. The resonance cascade is self-sustaining now. Even if we shut down our generators, the field would continue expanding on its own. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. They hadn't just created a weapon, they had unleashed something that could potentially spread across the entire galaxy, making energy weapons obsolete everywhere it reached. Admiral, she called out urgently, we need to establish contact with the Zephyrian fleet immediately. If they don't understand what's happening, they might try to overload the field again. Rodriguez nodded grimly. Communications, open a channel to the enemy fleet. All frequencies, maximum broadcast power. The response came within minutes. A voice speaking accented but clear English, transmitted via emergency chemical laser systems that the nullification field couldn't affect. Human vessels, this is Fleet Commander Azek of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy. Your weapon has disabled our primary systems. We request immediate parley under galactic combat conventions. Admiral Rodriguez exchanged glances with Sarah before responding. Fleet Commander, this is Admiral Rodriguez of Earth Defense Forces. We're willing to discuss terms, but you should know that the effect you've experienced is now self-sustaining and expanding. A long silence followed before the Zephyrian commander replied. Expanding? At what rate? Dr. Zhao quickly calculated the field dynamics. At current rate of expansion, the nullification zone will reach the orbit of Mars within 6 hours and encompass the entire solar system within 2 days. Another pause. Then, Admiral Rodriguez, we need to discuss this immediately. If this effect continues expanding, it could threaten every civilization in this sector of the galaxy. Sarah felt a mixture of triumph and terror. They had achieved the ultimate victory, complete neutralization of humanity's greatest enemy. But they had also created something that could fundamentally alter the balance of power across the known galaxy. Dr. Chun, Admiral Rodriguez said quietly, "Can we stop the expansion?" Sarah studied her instruments frantically. The cascade is powered by ambient zero-point energy now. We need to actively disrupt the quantum resonance. But that would require energy levels we don't have. What about the Zephyrians? Their reactors. That's actually our best option, Dr. Zhao interjected. If we could coordinate multiple reactor overloads in a specific pattern, we might be able to create destructive interference and collapse the field. Fleet Commander Azek was brought aboard the Defiance for emergency negotiations. The Zephyrian was a tall, elegant being with features that seemed to shift between humanoid and something else entirely. His presence radiated intelligence and controlled fear. Admiral, Dr. Chun, Azek began without preamble. In 300 years of galactic expansion, we have never encountered anything like this. Your technology doesn't just neutralize energy weapons. It makes our entire civilization obsolete. Sarah nodded soberly. Commander, that wasn't our intention. We were trying to develop a defense against your fleet, not destroy the foundation of galactic technology. Nevertheless, you have done exactly that. Azek studied the field expansion data. If this effect spreads beyond your solar system, it will reach Zephyrian space within 6 months. Our homeworld, our colonies, our entire infrastructure depends on energy-based technology. Admiral Rodriguez leaned forward. What are you proposing? A treaty, Azek replied simply. Immediate cessation of hostilities between our peoples, combined research to control this effect, and establishment of new galactic conventions regarding its use. Dr. Zhao looked up from her calculations. Commander, we believe we can collapse the field using coordinated reactor overloads from your ships. But it would require precise timing and complete trust between our forces. You would help us restore our technology? Azek seemed genuinely surprised. Sarah answered him directly. Commander, we created this field to defend ourselves, not to commit genocide. If we can work together to control it, we can ensure it never threatens innocent populations. The next several hours were the most tense in human history. Zephyrian and human engineers worked side by side, calculating the precise energy patterns needed to disrupt the quantum resonance. At the same time, diplomatic teams from both sides hammered out the framework for humanity's first galactic treaty. All ships report ready for synchronized overload, announced Captain Morrison. Zephyrian vessels are in position. Sarah took a deep breath. They were about to attempt something that had never been tried, using the enemy's own reactors to collapse a field that made their technology obsolete. If it failed, the expanding null zone could spread across the galaxy, ending energy-based civilization forever. Initiate overload sequence, Admiral Rodriguez commanded. Across the battlefield, human and Zephyrian ships began coordinated reactor overloads, creating a complex pattern of energy spikes designed to shatter the quantum resonance. The nullification field flickered, its boundaries wavering as destructive interference propagated through the cascade structure. Field coherence dropping, Dr. Zhao reported. Resonance cascade beginning to collapse. The invisible bubble that had encompassed millions of cubic kilometers began to shrink rapidly. Zephyrian ships flickered back to life as their energy systems came online. Within minutes, the field had contracted back to the Defiance, then winked out of existence entirely. Fleet Commander Azek's first words over the restored communication system were profound in their simplicity. The age of energy supremacy is over. Humanity has shown us that any technology can become obsolete. Perhaps it is time for a new kind of galactic civilization. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the newly constructed Galactic Research Station, watching joint human Zephyrian teams working on controlled applications of nullification technology. The Treaty of Solar Unity had established Earth as the center for research into what historians would call the breakthrough that changed everything. Energy weapons hadn't been banned. That was impossible across a galaxy of diverse civilizations. But their development had been revolutionized. New technologies focused on hybrid systems that could function even within nullification fields. Warfare itself was evolving, becoming more strategic and less dependent on raw destructive power. Dr. Zhao approached with the latest research findings. The Andorian Confederacy has requested assistance developing nullification shields for their merchant vessels. Apparently, pirate attacks have dropped to almost zero in systems where our technology is deployed. Sarah smiled as she watched former enemies working together on projects that would benefit the entire galaxy. Humanity's ultimate breakthrough hadn't just made energy weapons obsolete. It had forced galactic civilization to find new solutions to old problems. The sample that had started as a laboratory accident now sat in a place of honor in the station's museum, alongside artifacts from dozens of worlds. Children from 100 different species came to see the small gray cube that had ended the age of energy warfare and begun something entirely new. Outside the observation windows, ships from across the galaxy traveled freely through space, protected by technology that made aggression pointless and cooperation essential. Humanity had achieved something no previous civilization had managed. They had changed the fundamental nature of power itself. The Zephyrian Empire still existed, but it was no longer an empire built on military conquest. Neither were any of the other great powers. The galaxy was learning that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to make destruction irrelevant. Sarah Chun, the scientist who had accidentally discovered how to make energy disappear, had given the galaxy its greatest gift, a future where warfare was obsolete and cooperation was the only path to prosperity. Energy weapons were dead. The age of intelligence had begun.